know it's gonna be alright.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Johnversations, where it's not just a conversation, it's a Johnversation. And we are here at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention in Orlando, Florida. And I have with me a fantastic film producer, Cristobal Kruzen. And he is with Messenger Films. I want to make sure I get all that right. And the film that he has most recently produced is Let Me Have My Son, an incredible, powerful story about a father looking for his son after a mental illness issue. So help me fill in all those blanks, Cristobal. It's great to have you with us today.
Oh, thank you so much, John. Well, you're right to say I'm a film producer. I am probably more a film screenwriter, director,
Okay.
but I certainly do the producing part too. And in this movie, I played the leading role as
Oh,
well.
wow.
So I'm also an actor. But the movie itself is inspired by the real events concerning my son, my firstborn child, Daniel, who developed or began to show signs of mental illness that was later identified as schizophrenia as a teenager. So around the age of 16, 17, we could tell something was not right. He had been through a stage of rebellion earlier, but I kind of consider that normal to most teenagers.
Yeah.
To some degree. And then he, for 6 months, was back on the straight and narrow, and I thought, wow, we're out of the briar patch, you know. But then I noticed he would sit at his desk doing homework, and 2 hours later, literally 2 hours later, sometimes 3 hours later, he'd still be on that same page and struggling to understand words that he knew from grade school, right? And it was severe mental illness. I use the word severe to distinguish it from other kinds of mental illness that can be more readily treated with medications. In Daniel's case, he had to be institutionalized, involuntarily committed at the age of 18.
Oh, that had to be so heartbreaking.
It was heartbreaking, and then it became devastating in a way, because the years passed, not the months, but the years passed, and he was never allowed to come out of the hospital during that time. And
this was in
5.5 years.
This was in what state?
Virginia.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
5.5 years he was there.
Yes, and he would have continued to be there unless I had become his legal guardian and moved to Mexico. I went to Mexico as a place of refuge with my family because they told me, the psychiatrist, and he wasn't a bad man, don't get me wrong, they weren't like evil people or anything, but Daniel was not responding to the medication, right? And they were just flummoxed. They couldn't figure out how best to treat him. He was not getting any better. And I said, well, I think that if he could be home, I think if he could be home, he would have a better chance.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what happened in Mexico. He went into a psychiatric hospital there initially, but after 3 months came home. They let him go. Yeah, he'll do better at home, they said to me.
Yeah.
And I had taken the other children there, and we were building a little home there, and Daniel came home, and for a year he did remarkably better. And then he had a major relapse, and everything was thrown topsy-turvy again. So I don't want to go on and on. We'll run out of time.
Sure. Wow. So this is a personal story, absolutely, and this became a novel, correct?
Probably I wouldn't use the word novel, but a book, yes.
Okay.
What
novel would imply fiction, so yeah, definitely a book, an account of your story.
But in a kind of different way, in the sense that the book is a collection of prayer letters that I wrote, beginning with I was about to say his incarceration. It was not incarceration. He's never committed a crime, but he was institutionalized. And I began writing letters initially just to a small group of friends, telling them, this is what's going on. Pray. Will you pray? Will you pray? Will you pray? And those prayer letters, they kind of branched out into being more like reflections even. well, it became a book.
Yeah, yeah. Which then became a screenplay.
Yes.
And the film is Let Me Have My Son. So how has that film, I mean, it's been released, obviously. What kind of impact have you started to see from that?
Yeah. Well, it was released May 24th, so it's very, very recent.
Like right now is the 26th, so it's been out for 2 days.
Yeah.
Wow.
But we have gotten some very positive responses, and encouraging. I'd love to see a really big audience discover the film. But I think you can safely say that those who respond to it most are those who have some experience along those lines with a loved one.
Sure.
And it meets a need in their life even, you know.
Right. Well, I'm sure in your journey, as you were walking through this and your family was walking through this, you encountered a lot of people to help to walk through it with you that also have suffered in some way or another. I'm sure there are plenty of stories you could tell about how God put people in your life to help encourage you through.
Yes, absolutely. And some of them were just good, kind people, you know, who had compassion, you know, empathy.
Right.
I mean, they may not necessarily have had experience with mental illness, but they had the love of Christ, and that made a difference.
Of course, yeah. So obviously in a feature film there is going to be a little bit of dramatization that to help the story be told in a 90-minute package, you know.
Sure.
So walk me through the story, what happens that and if, you know, as it departs or stays true to the actual events, where does the film go?
Sure. Well, I did not want to make a documentary,
Right.
Which would have been more or less a factual retelling of everything, because I wanted to explore more the inner world, the feelings, and there's a prologue at the beginning of the film where the father says, and at the very opening of the film, you hear a voiceover. You don't know it's the father. You just hear a man's voice saying, "Can I tell you the story of my son? A good bit of what you're about to see is true as it happened, but more is true as to how it felt. And more than that is true, I suppose, of how it will be," which alludes to something beyond, you know, and something divine. But that middle part, more is true as to how it felt. As a filmmaker, that's really fertile territory, right?
Right, sure, yeah.
You know, so that's so honestly that was part of it. But I can't quote it exactly. But Robert Frost, the great poet, he said, somebody asked him, "What is poetry?" And he said, "Poetry is emotion searching for words."
Oh, wow.
I like that.
Yeah.
In this film is a lot of emotion searching for imagery and story beats and characters and that kind of. And in fact, you realize, not to create a spoiler alert, but a good part of the film is actually taking place in the father's mind. So, but it is a blend of the truth and this imaginary aspect.
So you recently won an award for your performance in this.
Yes.
The ICVM
Crown
Award for Best Actor in a Motion Picture.
Yes, that was May 23rd. So
just before it was even released.
Yes, on the eve.
That's got to feel gratifying. Probably not as gratifying as just being able to tell your story, but it is gratifying to know that others recognize your performance in that. It probably came from a very honest place.
It did. And as a young person, you know, in high school, being drawn to the arts, I was drawn to theater, and it was acting. I just loved and acted in a lot of the plays. That was my first love in the arts, was acting. And all these years that have transpired, I really haven't pursued the acting much. It's been behind the camera primarily. But there's always been that kind of, that desire of the heart. So who knows? Maybe
Yeah.
maybe this will take me in a new place.
Well, tell me a little bit about Messenger Films. Now, this is a nonprofit,
Yes. Yeah.
which is a different model than most film companies, so to speak. So, tell me a little bit how that came together.
Sure. Well, I became a Christian at the age of 29, and my in college I had started off as an English literature major, but I became very interested in filmmaking in college. I was barely 20 years old, and started watching all these classical movies called the classics, right, of cinema, and not just from the United States. I'm referring to Europe and Japan and around the world. And I became very interested in filmmaking. I was feeling that, I'm a writer, I'm an artist. This medium really could suit me well, is what I began to think. And so I majored in filmmaking in school, in university, and I transferred from one college to another. I ended up at NYU in New York, majored in film. That's where Martin Scorsese taught, and all those guys. And but I was not a believer but I was living in New York and trying to break into the filmmaking world. And I started a search for truth, a conscious search for truth in the midst of all of that, and just didn't even consider Christianity. Looked in all the Eastern religions. But I read the Bible eventually and became a Christian. And I assumed, well, I'll never be a filmmaker now, because filmmakers, they can't be. How do you bring your? It didn't even occur to me to bring my Christian faith into the world of filmmaking, because filmmaking for me was very secular, very worldly. It was very worldly. I couldn't see how I could serve God as a filmmaker. But you already know where I'm heading. God brought me back to that place, and He said, "No, you can and will serve me here."
Wow.
So I founded Messenger Films with the making of my very first movie, which was in Mexico. In 1988, we filmed there in Mexico, made our first film, totally financed through donations, very, very low budget.
Right.
Budgets are still an issue, a struggle. But
Right.
that's how we, from those are our roots. Our roots are in that nonprofit model. I think at the stage I am now in life, and not just me, but as I look back over history, I think what we really need to find is more of a patron model.
Yeah.
A very wealthy patron. They're not doing it they don't care about the money. They don't need the money.
Right.
But if you look at medieval art and the Renaissance, there were patrons there. Mozart was commissioned to write music and so forth, and the great painters. So I'm praying that we'll that God will connect us to patrons at that level for the future.
Absolutely. Well, let me find my son. Let me have my son.
Let me have my son.
Let me have my son. I want to get it right. How can people see the film?
Yeah, it's really simple. Just the movie name, letmehavemyson.com.
Okay.
There's a website. We'll take you to a website, and you'll find the information there to get a ticket. It's a premium pay-per-view model that's in effect at the moment. It'll last for the next 6-7 weeks, and you get your ticket right there and watch it in the comfort of your home.
Right. And then are there future distribution plans ahead?
Yes, sure. Around the world, we're going to take it. It's already been dubbed into Spanish, Portuguese. It'll be dubbed into German. By the way, one of our actors is a prominent German in this film. Is a prominent German actor.
Okay.
So that'll help us with distribution in Germany. But just letmehavemyson.com.
All right.
That's all you need to know.
Well, it's extra special when a film and the filmmaker is so intricately connected to the story. I mean, you're all in. You lived it,
yes,
and you're acting in it, and everything else. So
thank you for having any interest.
Oh my goodness, absolutely. I tell you, mental health is such an epidemic, and to know that there's stories. These stories help folks connect and give them hope.
Yeah.
You know, if they can see stories that at least show the love of a father, the chasing after the redemption of their son. I mean, is that not the gospel?
Amen.
You know.
Amen.
So, thank you so much for being with us, Cristobal.
Thank you.
Let
Thank
me have my son.com. Go buy a ticket, watch it, and enjoy it. And thank you for being with me on John Versations. Until next time, just remember, it'll be all right.